You know that when people have positive images, that helps them have positive action. So you have a lot of power as a presenter to create positive images with you, have positive responses. Okay? So let's think about presentation experiences that you've had. Like when people ask you to be a presenter, what's your interior response? I mean, like, do you find you say, "Oh, great, I'd love to do that," or do you find, yeah?
It depends on the subject. Like,
It depends on the
yeah,
subject.
If
Okay,
you're
so
forced to
give me-
do something.
If you're forced to do it, then what's your response?
Okay, I have to, but
I have to,
all right.
but.
I have to kind of do a lot more work and research on it versus something that I want to teach or know
So
about.
sometimes you say, I'd like to really teach that, and so you're eager to do it. Anybody else, what's your response?
I think there's a lot of preparation and that goes into being a facilitator. When you're sitting in the audience and you have like a homework assignment or it makes you think or something, you're like, oh, this is so much work. This is, it's making me think. I'm taking notes. But you don't really realize what it takes to be at the front of that group.
Okay.
And
So how do you, what's your experience?
that it takes like a lot of preparation.
Okay,
You
so
don't
you
just go
already
up there
know
and
some
wing it.
work.
And that's all in it. There's work involved in addition to the like nerves and things like that that are
It's a lot of work, and you also know that you've got nerves that come to the fore, nervousness. that
and,
comes to the
and
fore.
it's about balance, It's
Good.
not easy to be up there.
Susan?
I think when I'm asked to do it, I mean, initially I'm like, oh,
You're initially like what?
it's like, oh, crud,
Okay.
But then I feel this enormous responsibility
Yes.
on what I want to make sure that the people know about
Good
the
point.
thing I'm supposed to say.
Yeah, exactly. Good. All right. My experience, when someone says, I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but my experience first is just a freeze. When somebody says you're a presenter, or would you present, I just say, no, thank you. My first response is no. Okay, so, and so I have to really work through my negativity, my nervousness, my unease about being a quote unquote presenter. And so, now let's just talk about, in terms of when you think of people doing presentations and having heard, great presentations and then weak ones, what are some of the characteristics, of a great presentation? What comes to your mind?
For me, good diction.
I'm sorry?
For me, good diction is important.
Good diction. Good. All right. Another one.
They're relatable.
Meaning?
They're able to engage and relate to their audience.
Uh-huh.
They talk to them, not at them.
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. Somebody else.
Organized, I think organized.
They're organized. Okay, good.
They complete their thought process.
They complete the thought.
They have a thought process. Right.
Good. All right, good.
I think a sense of humor is helpful too.
Humor. Oh, that's really good, Something that I wish I had more of. I saw that we heard, when we were out in the hall, we heard this group have a lot of humor in that conversation earlier this morning. So humor is good in the presentations. All right, and Susan, I think you said earlier visuals.
Yes.
Visuals. Okay. Okay, now when they're not so great,
Like watching paint dry.
like watching paint dry. That's a good metaphor, isn't it? When you experience this, like watching paint dry, what is going on?
You usually have a monotone way of speaking. Everything they say sounds the same.
Yeah, poor
No
vocal
inflection,
skills.
no-
Poor vocal skills.
Yeah.
Okay,
I would say confusing.
they're confused.
Yeah, very confusing.
Condescending.
Yeah, condescending, good, like arrogance.
Not able to complete a sentence.
Isn't
Obvious.
Okay. Anything else? All right, these are good.
No control
And they have no control?
of the presentation. No structure or
Soft
control.
spoken.
Disorganized.
Right.
Like kind of like soft spoken, or maybe even just the volume is so low, like you can't even hear her.
Okay, enough, huh? We're real clear about these guys that are challenging to listen to. Okay, so now, when you think about, when you present, you know, what do you do to create a presentation? What are kind of the steps that you go through? Does somebody share your own steps of creating a presentation?
I usually, first, when you create one, I want to know what is needed.
Okay.
I know the topic, what do you?
Yeah, decide the topic, and you want a topic that's needed, or relevant to the group, or whatever.
And that's usually when they'll come up to me, I'll need a presentation on one thing or another. I'll say, okay, what do you need? Then I'll say, how long is the presentation? So I
Okay.
know what I need to include in it. And then I'll ask all the other questions. How many people are going to be in the audience, and what type of people do you
Good, so
expect?
you get a hold of who your audience is, good.
Find out where it's going to be, if it's going to be in a large room or a small room, because large lecture halls, you lose people that scatter themselves all over. Like
Okay,
at UIC, we'd have 20 people in a room that holds 400. One would sit up in the corner there, one would sit up in the corner there. It's like, it's very disengaging, so I find out what kind of room, where it's at. Is the projector there, or do I have to bring my own?
okay, so he does a whole lot of homework in preparation to even before he sits down and says, this is, I'm working on it. Now, give us briefly some steps when you actually sit down and start
Okay.
working on it.
Usually then I do a little research.
Research,
And
okay?
I'll find out.
Don't worry about it, just go ahead, that's another step. What's after that, research?
After the research, then I'll start to build either a PowerPoint, and I'll put together handouts and visuals.
Okay,
Like
Interesting.
Homeland Security, we would have pictures of the letters that were sent to Senator Dashlin Lady. We would have them all plasticized. So then you start making little trinkets
okay,
to grab people's kind of
good,
these
okay.
little things. So building a presentation, getting some handouts, getting some visuals, possible gathering some video clips.
Okay, great. All right, now each one of you has done presentations at some time, and you all have your steps. Now I'm going to lay out 4 steps from just for our presentation that we're going to play with, okay? So Jim,
Yes.
get this
Oh,
over here.
okay, sorry.
This is your pass here. So,
Anyone know where Denise is?
what did you know what happened to her? Her stuff is here, right?
Maybe she had a call.
Hazel's so good, she's got everybody's phone number. Yeah.
Except their phone is going off.
You're right, I'm so bad now, it's weird how you just stop even bothering memorizing phone numbers.
Yeah. Somebody take good notes, and we'll keep these steps up here. I hope she's not stuck on an elevator, wouldn't that be awful?
Oh, which has happened in.
Jim's gonna go
In the limits, for sure.
Okay, so, these are the 4 steps, they're very simple steps. Much like Jim was saying, you decide your topic, and again, we're going to suggest that you think of your objectives in terms of what do you want them to remember, that's the rational, right? Out of what you're saying, just summarize, and then what is the experience you want them to have? And summarize that, so that's the first step. Then the second step is to brainstorm, and I think it's interesting that Jim uses PowerPoint because PowerPoint's kind of used like using Post-its. You can move them around. You got this idea on this PowerPoint, this one, this slide, and you can move them around like you can move around Post-its. I tend to use Post-its. We're going to experiment with using Post-its today to be able to move things around.
PowerPoint has gotten better because of all the add-ons with graphics packages
Yeah.
and
Absolutely. So
it's not by PowerPoint.
So today we're going to do the hand method. but PowerPoints work, okay? So there's three kinds of things that you're trying to brainstorm. One is ideas. So just what are the thoughts and the points and the messages that you're trying to communicate, okay? So you just brainstorm those. Then the second one I'm going to say is images, but I mean this in a broad way. What are the stories you're going to tell? What are the visuals you're going to use? What are the metaphors that you might use? What are the activities you might use in the midst of your presentation, etc.? So that's very broad. And in my mind, ideas is more like the left brain side, the thinking side, and then the images has to do with tapping into the right brain. So in your presentation, you're using both right brain and left brain types of messages. And then the third thing is questions. And I find this helpful, especially as a facilitator, of trying to make it a participatory presentation and getting some feedback from the group. One thing when you're presenting, you can have feedback from the group. Did anybody look at that video that shows how not to do a presentation? You can look at it, it's about a 3-minute video, and the whole group is sitting there like this, Well, what does that tell you? Are they even there with you? You don't even know. And so questions help you to get participation from the group, and you get feedback, and you begin to see where people are. So brainstorming all of these things, and then the third step is to organize them into major points. And I'm going to suggest to you that you organize them into 4.
Can't see that.
Can't see that color. Okay, 4 major points. How's that? And this has to do with it's a discipline. I mean, you may not have 4 points, but sometimes when you find that you have 3 major points and you say, what's my 4th point? All of a sudden something emerges that you hadn't thought about talking about. And so, or maybe you had too much to talk about in one point. So what are the different aspects of it? You realize you have more than one point in that point. And so it helps you to dialogue and to tighten your thinking. So, and then you decide the flow and the opening and the closing relative, and then how much time you think you're going to take on each one of them. Now, so I'm going to pass out a worksheet, and we'll walk through these steps again, and then see what your questions are. Thank you. So on this worksheet, you can see, and this is what we're going to do with this rest of the time here together. You can see that what is the title of your presentation? So you give it a name. What are your objectives? You see the 2 objectives there. And then after you've done your brainstorm, organizing it into 4 major points, and then you'll find you'll have lots of detail under each point. And so you name your major point, and then you say, what are the points underneath that? And so I often call this the 4x4x4 worksheet, because you've got 4 major points, and underneath each of those, you have 4 other points. So it's a 4x4. Which is a 4x4. And then there's a place to put your images for each one, and then to ask yourself, what is your master image? So when I was preparing to do this presentation, this is how it looked when I started to pull it together. Now, as Jim says, I use lots of bells and whistles on mine to make it simple for you, because I use different colors to help me make sure. So I used green for ideas, and I use pink for the images, and I use blue for the questions. So I could look quickly and say, do I have questions on every one of my points? Or do I have images for every one of my points? So that's why I found using the different colors.
Is that for your notes when you give the presentation,
This is
where
the-
you're showing everyone that's for you look at it and presenting to the group? How is that?
This is what I did to prepare to talk to you about this yesterday.
Okay.
So I'm right now in the middle of, or almost the end of doing a 4x4 presentation to you.
You are near the end of what you're holding in your hand.
Exactly. So
Wow.
I want to say that for me, I said that I'm uneasy and that I experience fear and lots of negative emotions. But I've moved to the fact that I realize, it's good for me to stretch and deal with a method. I would have liked a gym do this session, let Jim do the one that I don't feel comfortable with. But to stretch and try and do something, and so it's lifelong learning. It's not like you get it the first time around. And maybe even, after you've done it 10 times and you say, wow, that wasn't very great. And I did it a lot better earlier, So it's just, you just keep learning and you keep trying and you keep stretching yourself. As a facilitator, you do that with different methods. So, part of my lifelong learning, I had some point was humor. I want to have more humor in what I'm doing, so that people will, do you know that humor does, opens your arteries and your blood flow 25%. So if you're tense and the group is tense and you have some humor, it really boosts something. Did you know?
I didn't know that, but the smiling, the face muscles and the frowning.
Yeah, how much effort does it take to frown?
It takes a lot of
So I like to remember, for me, for big presentations, is it Malia Obama? Is that how you pronounce her name?
Malia.
Malia Obama. Okay, when she was 10 years old, I think she's 14 now, right? So this was in the first campaign when some interviewer said to her, "Now, Malia, how do you get nervous when you're asked to present in public?" She said, "No, it's not about me." And I said to myself, when I heard that, I said, okay, I can learn from Malia. It's not about me in terms of being a presenter. That's the problem. Is I'm worried about me and do I have good diction? Am I in a monotone? Am I boring? All these negative things are turning around. It's not about me. It's about, did I communicated something that was important to the group and did it stick? Okay, now I did that in 20 minutes. All right? That was a 20-minute presentation. So now let's step back and just look at the presentation for a minute and say to yourself, or say to us, so what messages stick for you out of the last 20 minutes?
Know your subject. Know your topic.
Prepare.
Prepare.
Make it so it's easier for you. And, based on how you are when you do presentations, you've broken it into components so it's comfortable for you to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that people can get what you're trying to say.
Okay. Did I say that?
That's what I do.
This is good. So sometimes messages come across, but you're not even sure how you said it, that it got communicated. That's the message you got.
I thought you wanted to get the point across that you need to reduce your stress level. Because you were saying that I sometimes worry about all this, and I took something from Obama where she said, I'm just not talking. There was a way that you say, maybe I can take something from that. Maybe I don't have to worry about all this.
Yeah, exactly. Good. I did say that my objectives were to demonstrate the participatory presentation method using left and right brain approaches to messaging. Now, so what was a left brain message? What was an idea that I communicated?
Have so many of these topics or points.
Okay, 4 points.
That's how many they quantified it.
Yeah, quantified it.
That's the left brain technique, right?
Yeah, we have left brain.
Boring.
Yeah. Boring.
They say, the book says,
But 4 you can remember. Okay. All right, so left brain and right. And then my experiential, what I wanted to have you experience. I want you to raise your hand. Did you experience that I created enthusiasm for experimenting with being a more effective presenter?
You don't want to ask that as a yes or no, because then that doesn't facilitate dialogue.
I'm not leading the conversation. I'm asking a question of about experimenting with being more effective presenter. So,
Okay.
well, that's pretty, you're being nice to the presenter, that's good. And that's, you know, but that's, you write it down and it may or may not happen. And you don't ask the group usually for this, you know, conversation. They'd be like.
I was just trying to show that I learned something this morning.
So.
You get an A.
All right, now I'm going to ask us to practice. So in your group, what I want you to do is, I want you to take your chapter, so you can decide the topic title of your chapter. You know what chapter you're going to do. Now, first of all, I want you to do this individually. Each one of you is going to create a presentation. Now, you can learn from each other, and you can look over each other's shoulders, and you can share with each other what you come up with, and you can steal from each other. You know, because you'll find that people give you a couple of ideas, and all of a sudden you think of 10 more. So each get a page like this to put your presentation on. And Jim, can you get Post-its for people?
Sorry.
I want you to get 3x3s and 1x2 or whatever they are.
I like that. Which size? Lots of post-its.
Yeah, exactly. So here we go.
Relocate our. Something they're all on the eight.
So we only have 30 minutes. We have 30 minutes, okay? Or 25. Let's say we have 30 and then we'll go to 105. So the first thing you do is write down your topic and title quickly. Don't take a long time to objective. Sometimes you come back to it later and do it. Just say to yourself, what do you want me to remember out of this? Then you're looking through your chapter. And you're asking yourself, what does every adult need to know? What does every adult need to know out of this chapter? Okay? From this chapter. When you think of your chapter, what does every adult, you look at it and you say, brainstorm. As you glance through the titles and if you've read it and look at your chart, and you say, what does every adult need to know? Just make a big brainstorm. And be sure to brainstorm ideas, brainstorm images. What did we say were in images? What did we say? If you forget what images are, you can turn your page over and it says a metaphor, a symbol, an analogy, you know, activity, all those things.
Story.
Just
If I did this brainstorm on post-it notes.
I want you to brainstorm on little post-it notes. Okay? You do brainstorm on little post-it notes. And then when you organize them into 4 points, then you use the bigger post-it notes to say what your 4 points were. So you see on my chart, you see this? I'll put this up on the wall. On the board. All my little post-it notes. And then the big ones were the 4 points that I had. I had presentation, expectations. I had
Oh, I see.
why is our presentations important? What are the 4 basic steps in lifelong learning? Those are my 4 points. And then I put all my other little post-its underneath those 4 points. You get it? So you start with the brainstorm. That's the first thing you're going to do. In 10 minutes, I'll tell you that it's time to start organizing. Okay, Joe, ask.
Question. So
Yeah.
I have this sheet, which you have the template on the back.
Yeah.
So are we supposed to fill this out and then transfer that into this big sheet with all the Post-it notes?
Now, I'm going to ask you to write everything on Post-it notes.
Okay.
Just start out and write everything you're thinking of on Post-it notes and put it on your big sheet. So it's like this,
Okay.
okay?
But are we following this format?
Yeah, eventually, when you get to this level of organizing it, you're going to organize your Post-it notes like this, like that, except on your big sheet.
Okay.
So that by noon, we have something like this. Each one of you has something like this.
Okay.
Is that?
Oh, okay. I mean, so we're gonna create this on this.
And we're starting with that
subject.
Chapter
Your
4.
chapter.
or-
Our chapter.
With your chapter. Chapter 4 here, chapter 5 there, chapter 6. And so you have a little tiny post-it note, a little post-it note to say, what are things every adult needs to know
From that check.
from that chapter? Okay?
Use whatever color you want.
So just use any color. Just use one color. I'm too fancy, you know, I do lots of them. So here, Jonna, she's way ahead of everybody. See how she's starting to write her post-it notes? Here we go. We got Michelle over here too. We got Susan.
Mel, lunch meat, what are you writing?
Now, I'm gonna stand here in the middle, and you just raise your hand if you have a question. I'll come over and talk to you, okay? Just brainstorm, as many things you can think of. Oh, look at this. Michelle's got lots and lots.
Organize the days first.
Oh, look at her. Yeah. Brainstorm, brainstorm, good. Okay, now put one on each one of these Post-its.
Okay, so,
All right? Yeah.
so 1, 2, 3, 4, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what it's going to come to be eventually, but just scatter them all over here for the time being. You don't have to worry about the order. Yeah. You can put those same ones on each one of the Post-it. When you look at your chart, when you look at the chapter, what do you think people should know about this chapter? What did you find interesting? What do you feel like is important?
anyone has to
Speak
know?
for
I don't
yourself,
know.
Smarty.
I don't know mine, I'm just curious if anyone knew yours. All right, well, sure. Next year, in the year 2014, will be the 110th anniversary of the first development of the intelligence quotient. The guy that came up with it was a fellow by the name of Benet, Alfred Benet, a Frenchman, and he was assigned to do that. You remember taking the SAT test?
Yeah.
Okay, the SAT is based upon the IQ quotient, and it is, while it uses a different numeric system, is an indicator of IQ. The intelligence quotient, that as designed, was formulated primarily to evaluate and assess one's intelligence. Recent developments in research has discovered that there's more intelligences than just the one that the IQ and the SATs measure. And the work was formulated first by a Harvard professor by the name of Howard Gardner, who wrote a book called The Frames of Mind, and then he's written about, what, 5 or 6 other books. And during, in his discovery of his first discovery, he had 7 intelligences. Later on, he added an 8th, which is going to be the basis upon which we have our conversation today. But more recently, he's added a 9th, which I'll tell you about later. In other words, he's suggesting that there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's 9 different ways we learn. So, to get us started, you have nearby a set of Post-it notes, correct? What, yellow Post-it notes?
Mm-hmm.
Grab a little stack of Post-it notes and a black felt tip magic marker. Should be right. I see yours there. And one response for each Post-it. Answer the question, what is, or all of the ways that you have ever learned anything? Example, you might write on the Post-it, heard a lecture. You might write on here, collected stamps. You might write on here, sank or swam. You might write on here, field trip. You might write on here, read a book. You get the idea?
Yeah.
For every way that you can recall throughout your whole life that you learned something, write on here the method by which you learned it, the technique by which you learned it.
One method per sheet.
One method per Post-it, correct. You collected butterflies. You saw a PowerPoint. You sat in a class. There are no wrong answers. Take about another 10 seconds. Okay, finish writing the one you just started writing and stop. And count your Post-its. Finish writing the one you're on and then stop. And then count your Post-its. Raise your hand if you have 5 or more. Raise your hand if you have 8 or more. Raise your hand if you have 7 or more. Karen, Denise, Jim.
Oh, wait, I got some.
Okay, 7.
Counting is not one of them.
Michelle. Very good. So several of you at 7. And I could give, now, I'm going to give one of those participatory presentations that Karen just talked about before lunch. One of the things that you can do to participate is, as I'm talking, if other methods occur to you, you may, over here, continue to write Post-its. You can continue to write Post-its, right, like this. But you don't have to. But it'd be nice if you did, but you don't have to, okay? So, first thing that Gardner had to do is had to define intelligence. And intelligence entails the ability to solve problems or fashion products of consequence in a particular cultural setting or community. Okay? How would you, in your own words, describe or define what intelligence is? What do you think? What does intelligence mean to you?
I think it's the ability to develop.
The ability to develop and adapt. Okay, someone else. There's no wrong answer, and I'm not fishing for a right answer either. I'm just curious. Whatever you think.
Reaching a level of competence at something.
Reaching a level of competence. Something. Okay.
The process of information by an individual.
The process of information by an individual. I think I would.
Process of retention.
Process of retention, or I might tweak it a bit, but processing of retention of information. But anyway, cool. Anybody else? All right, so think about it, because need to ponder on this. Now, Gardner is going to talk about 8 different ways by which we acquire and accumulate and process intelligence. Now here's one way to, I don't have a handout for you. This slideshow will be available on the D2L when you get home. So let's try this. Nearby there's a green sheet of paper. Everyone take a green sheet of paper like this. Got it handy? Now I want you to follow along with me. This is going to be the hardest thing to do today. Okay?
You promise?
I promise. You can do this. You've mastered today's class. First thing I want to do is, so it's a portrait. No, not portrait. It's landscape, right? Fold it left to right or right to left, and then crease it. Got it? So now you have this. All right? Do it one more time.
This is why you were doing this earlier.
Yeah, practice. Okay? Got it? Do it one more time.
Paper.
Yeah, well, I got paper. You got the card stuff. Okay, so you should have something like this, right? Now unfold it. And what do you have when you unfold it? 8 pieces. 8 slices. 8 pieces. You see that? So, if you're a linear intelligence, you may now take notes. For every time I talk about a different intelligence, you can write it in one of the columns. But you don't have to. I just thought that. Okay, you can do it this way. Or if you want to think of some other way to take notes, my point is I don't have any handouts for you, so you're going to have notes. Now again, this will be available when you get home. All right? Are you ready to learn about the 8 intelligences? Here's how it goes. We all have them all. We all have all 8. But each one of us has them in different proportions. So you might be stronger over here, a little weaker over there, but someone else might be just the opposite of you. And if you happen to discover that it's your spouse, then no wonder you can't get along. Just a thought.
Be careful.
Yeah. Okay, the first one here, does it say logical mathematical behind me? Good. How many of you here, balancing your checkbook is a piece of cake? Okay, good. Glad to hear that. How many of you here, when you get ready to go on a vacation or or getting ready to go on a trip, you kind of plan it out in some level of detail? Okay, I got you. How many of you here, when you get the Tribune, can solve the Sudoku in about 5 minutes or less? Or, you know what I mean by Sudoku? How many? Huh?
Depends on the questions.
Depends on what day of the week. Friday, forget it. Okay, I understand. This is Friday, so no wonder there's no answers here. Anyway, how many do the Sudokus and do it reasonably well? Okay. Well, those of you who raise, not all the time. Well, those of you who have raised your hand on any of those questions, you have some competency in the logical and the mathematical intelligence. These are the thinkers. These are the folks who do mental calculations. How many people learn things by asking questions? Oh yeah. All right. Okay, that's your process. You're comfortable here. How many like to make outlines? Okay. So that's part of the logic. This is the scientific method. You know, get an idea, you test it out, so on and so forth. Frankly, folks, the ORID is the logical and mathematical intelligence. It's a rational, guided sort of. It's linear in nature. It's going from A to B to C. Logic. You with me? So, kind of got that? Nothing wrong with it. In fact, it is very, very critical. It probably is the backbone of Western civilization. It's probably the backbone of all of our scientific and technological advances. This intelligence guides us to the moon and back, I might add. I mean, this is a critical intelligence. And in Western society, you can hardly survive without it. There might be some societies, but this is not critical. Boy, in our society, you got to be able to do this. This is step by step. So math and science were our favorite classes, maybe in school. Okay, with me? You recognize this intelligence? Okay, so that's one. Any questions about it? All right, let's do another. Does this say verbal linguistic?
Mm-hmm.
This is readers, stories. Now, probably, if the Sudoku was the logical mathematical, maybe the crossword puzzle. If you went to the crossword puzzle before the Sudoku, then you might be one with linguistic and verbal. This is words. How many like to play Scrabble? Okay, this is your intelligence. This is when you want to learn something, how to do Google searches. Okay, here we go. How many like to tell and listen to stories? Okay, the highlight of the week is Garrison Keillor. He tells his wrap-up story in Prairie Home Companion. I mean that storytelling. This is our thing. And so you got it on NPR on Fridays. They do the StoryCorps program, the storytelling. All the way over here at the Chicago Cultural Center, the old library over here. They have now the StoryCorps are not familiar with that, I would encourage you.
The moth,
Huh?
the moth,
The moth.
that's on a Saturday afternoon, NPR, at
Okay.
2 to 3 or something like that. There's also monthly moth meetings, and they're storytellers, but they compete with each other.
Last Saturday, we heard one young woman talk about how she was as strong as an evangelical Christian, but she also got involved in being an Avon cosmetic seller. And as more deeply she got into each, they began to overlap. She realized that she was trying to solve people's problems, either by selling them cosmetics or by selling them Jesus, you know. And they started blurring in her mind. It was a funny thing. Now, these two methods, the logical mathematical, the first one, and the verbal linguistic, these are all taxed to us. We read a book, we get a textbook, $180 textbook. And you know, you read it, you gotta learn, this is how you learn things, and the rote memory, and on and on and on. These first two methods, folks, the reason why they're familiar to us is that nearly every form of K through 12 and beyond education is through this technique, through one of these two techniques. And it's, you know, there's good sides to that, but there's downsides to that as well, because it doesn't enhance the full human capacities that we all have. We need to find other techniques. And by the way, I want to say that the multiple adults is nothing just for adult learning. This is for cradle to grade learning. So this is for childhood education, preschool education, high school education, so on and so forth. So let's really take a closer look at the other six, because I think you'll find them of interest. The third one here is the body and kinesthetic. Kinesthetic is another way of saying being active, or use of the body. I remember years ago, I liked to ride my bicycle. But then I grew up and got to be a professional person, and I never rode my bicycle. And probably I didn't ride a bicycle for what, 40 years. But you know what happened when I got back on that bicycle? It's like I'd never been on it. Has it ever happened to you? Maybe another experience I had was bowling. I liked to bowl. And I stopped bowling after I finished college. It's funny, I carried my bowling ball with me. I moved it all over. Every time I moved, I moved my bowling ball with me. But anyway, I never bowled until again. It must have been 40 years. And I got back up on the bowling alley, and it was almost as if I had never stopped. I just sort of picked right back up. It's called muscle memory. Our body can learn and remember how to do things. And how many of you know of, and maybe you yourself were one of these people, you can take apart a radio and put it back together again, you can take apart a computer and put it back together again, any gadget, you can take it apart and put it back together again. Any of you like that? Or know of people like that? Or heard about people like that? And it happens. I don't know how they do it. So, here's a better way to put it. How many of you, when the company, DePaul, uploads a new program, and then I'll tell you, over here's the manual, but you don't read the manual. You just turn on the program and you sort of trial and error.